Good morning, everyone. We're just getting ourselves set and ready for today's conversation. So are we good to go, Meryl? All right, awesome. Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Kelsey Liverpool, founder and executive director of Kids Rank, program for military and veteran children. And thank you for joining us again today for our Foundations Conversation series, talking about the mental health and well-being of military and veteran children. So I'm really super excited about today's conversation. We really, through this series, wanted to talk about different areas or topics that are relevant to military families, specifically related to the children. And one of the partners that came up is Camp Corral. My own children actually attended Camp Corral, I guess maybe 6 years ago. And it was a camp experience for military and veteran children. And they actually specifically work with kids who have wounded or injured parents. And so I'm pleased today to have Hannah Hutler, who is the Chief Program Officer of Camp Corral, and I'll let her in a moment talk a little bit about Camp Corral and what they do, as well as Kara Benson, who is we were joking before, who wears many hats, mother of 5 military children, spouse, military spouse, Dole Fellow, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and many hats, which she'll go into as we start this conversation. So I want to turn it over to Hannah, and we're going to this session keep it conversational. Sometimes we have our sessions where we are presenting information and it's a little more structured. But I think that with this topic area around military children as caregivers, it's important for us to have more of an open dialogue. I think there are areas that, I feel like a lot of times people don't think about military children in the structure of our families. And so sometimes there are actually additional stressors or sensitive topic areas that, really should be talked to bring awareness around. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Hannah and have her share a little bit more about Camp Corral and the work that they're doing.
And thank you, Kelsey, so much for inviting us. We are honored to be here. We, of course, love talking about military kids. It is our bread and butter. It is our passion. And I think Kelsey and I could spend a whole week just talking about military kids. So Camp Corral is a free summer camp program for children of wounded, ill, injured, and fallen military service members. And we provide that unique summer camp experience as well as other recreational programs. We've been doing this for about 10 years, actually for 10 years. And we've served about 24,000 military children over the course of those 10 years. We are across the country. I think this year we're serving in 15 different states. And we also are offering family camp for the first time, which is super exciting, as well as some virtual opportunities. As Kelsey said, I am the program officer with Camp Corral. I am also an Army veteran spouse. So I have a little bit of that side of things as well as the contractor experience too, which is real fun. And I would love to introduce my counterpart, Kara, who has many hats and a wealth of knowledge to share with everyone today.
Are amping me up. So I am so happy to be here. Thank you, Kelsey and Hannah, for having me to talk about one of my passions also is military children and children of wounded, ill, and injured, and what they kind of face not only through their time serving with their family in the military, but what happens afterwards. And I do see some kids out there today, so just a heads up that we might go a little deep today. And just know that some heavier topics might be talked about. So if you have kids in the room with you, just a heads up. Okay, so back to me. I do have 5 kids. Our oldest is 17. Our youngest is 5. I have 2 teens in the house now, which is very weird. I am an Army veteran wife. My husband was in the Army. due to, he did do multiple deployments in Iraq. We're old folks, I like to joke. During his time in Iraq, he was injured and has a significant TBI that has started to impact mobility. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Oh, all my many hats. I did kind of odd jobs through college. I graduated college and eventually took over a nonprofit as director, taught college on the side, and then I had to become a full-time caregiver. Since then, I've also become mom, homeschool mom, caregiver, and veteran and military advocate. And so I'm now a fellow with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation for, I think, another month until the new class comes in. I am a Dole Fellow out of Florida.
And thank you, Kara, so much for sharing that with everyone. Y'all are in good company here. We're all peers and we're all in this together. Really, that is one of the things we love to emphasize is you're not alone. We've all gone through a lot of this stuff together. I'd like to just start out talking about the general military child experience. You know, we've heard anecdotally, and some of the very limited research out there tells us that military kids of active duty, of reserve and guard components, those that are still serving, are taking on bigger roles in their household than their peers, whether it's preparing meals for siblings or taking on some of those parental roles when somebody's out of the house, TDY, or deployed, anything like that. So I'd like to just start, Kara, if we can talk a little bit about that, just the piece of what kids are doing to step up in their families in general.
Sure. I mean, I think we all know that there's a normalcy to chores, or, you know, we say it in our household is we're all a family and we contribute to that family. We're obviously a large family, so that's helpful. But I think, you know, there's a piece that we sometimes miss because we get very wrapped up in our normal and we forget that our normal as a military family is not the same for everybody else. My kids always are kind of taken aback when they meet someone who didn't have to move a million times, right? You know, and so, you know, there's the logistical of moving and what that does to a child and kind of their flow deployments. One parent away, or sometimes two parents away, you know, living with grandma, grandpa. While the one parent is away, maybe they pick up a few more chores. In our household, dad was away, so kids might have, you know, helped do more things around the house because dad was away, and I'm still only one person. You know, not that we're expecting anything that's above and beyond, but I think it's really important for us to realize that when our kids step up like that, even as a sense of maturity and pride for them, it's an added stressor. You know, and that's just kind of general military. And then we get to, if you have a wounded or an ill or an injured, even in service, they might be headed with you to doctor's appointments. All of my kids have pretty much grown up in a hospital. So they have definitive views on hospitals and doctor's appointments and all of that. And it's just their experience. In how I talk a lot about on the wounded side or veteran side too, your kids might come up and make sure dad, or, you know, whoever the wounded is, feels good for the day. They might walk, help dad calm down or mom calm down if there's a mental health issue. In our household, we have a pill dispenser that beeps. My 5-year-old thinks it is the cat's meow to grab said pill dispenser and run it to dad because dad's not always by it or can't always hear it. And so is it normal for us? Absolutely. Is it asking her to do a major task? No, she's thrilled. She's happy. She volunteered, but it is considered secondary caregiving when those kids, it's above and beyond what we would normally have in a household. Again, not necessarily a bad thing. And I want to reinforce this is totally normal and it's okay. But with sometimes those things, kids can load on some feelings with that, whether it be resentment that they're doing it, even though they might be happy about it and prideful about it. One of my kids, dad forgets a lot, right? So one of my kids feels like it makes him feel great if he goes around and makes sure all the doors are locked at night. It's nothing we've ever asked that particular child to do. It's nothing we've ever, you know, had him step up. We've never requested that step up. It's something that made him feel comfortable and good. But then he gets stressed about it, right? Did I do it? did I do it? So again, I want to just let everybody know this is totally normal. If your kids are doing this, it's okay. But know that sometimes with this comes a little bit of stress. And I think that's what Hannah and I are going to kind of talk about today is we should be aware of kind of some of the stress on our kids and some of like the mental awareness for our kids. I know as caregivers and as military spouses, we talk about this a lot. You know, your spouse is deployed, you have family readiness group, you might be a caregiver, you have caregiver support groups. We have been in two systems that are very veteran centric and service member centric. We have finally started to recognize the needs to support those on the family sidelines. And I think what we all wanted to talk about today was not forgetting to support the kids that are on the sidelines too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that you're spot on. I mean, you know, you think about the added responsibility. You know, we were saying yesterday that, you know, our kids have been making lunches since they probably were in first grade or kindergarten, and it's a contribution to the household. And yes, that's not, you know, that's a great thing, a lesson in responsibility and, you know, and independence and all of those things. But how can we be supportive of those actions and of them as young people in taking on the responsibilities and what that could mean, you know, if there's anxiety associated with it or, you know, stress and those kinds of things, how can we help to mitigate some of that?
Well, we talked about lunches because, and this is really funny. You know, we all made our lunches, right? I was like, hey, kids, make your lunch. One of my girls is in, she's a special needs. She went to school this year and she comes home the first day. She goes, Mom, nobody makes their lunch except me. I'm like, I never thought this would be a big deal. And all of a sudden it's like, Mom, is it okay that I make my lunch? Do I have to make my lunch? Are they going to make fun of me? Something you would never associate stress with, right?
Right.
We
Yeah.
have a 45-minute conversation over is perfect. You know, do you want me to make your lunch? She's like, no, I want to know what I put in it. And you're like, great, then make your lunch. But
exactly.
you know, exactly. But to take that 45 minutes and help walk them through that journey, I mean, that's kind of, you know, what that's where we start talking about that.
Absolutely.
I think that's hugely important too, especially as when we're in that moment, we don't always realize like, oh, this can potentially have bigger implications. One of the things in our household, my husband was a single parent for a long time. And when he deployed, my stepdaughter was responsible for the bills. And so now as an adult, having paid those bills, but learning the value of money now for herself and relearning how to budget and that kind of stuff as an adult, having had that experience taking care of a family before, has definitely been a little bit of a challenge to work through and understand. And so I think just backing up every once in a while, I know Karen and I have talked about before of like, oh, you have a stomach ache? Are you actually sick? Did you eat the 3-day leftover sushi in the fridge? Or are you just really nervous about something? Like let's process through this and see what some of those underlying factors are. Are you actually sick? Or is this just the physical culmination of your worry and stressors coming out?
Because I think as military families, a lot like we power through situations, you know, with expectations. And so just what you said, to take a step back. So not that anything is, they shouldn't be doing any of these things, but taking the step back to have that 45-minute conversation, you know, say, what is that stomach ache about, you know, and talk about it. And yeah. So.
And point to talk about is something as simple as a stomach ache. I mean, we think of, okay, our kid needs support, or there's, you know, there's some anxiety in the household, and we're thinking of fidgeting, unable to sit down, right? You know, chewing on hair, eating hair. But to think, you know, those are some things you may or may not think about. Nervous tics. I mean, if someone comes up to you and go, hey, I'm really anxious, then it's really easy to know. But your 5-year-old is not going to come up to you and say, hey, Mom, I'm anxious. She's going to come up and say, I have a headache. I can't sleep. I have a stomach ache. And even, and let's throw special needs in there because we know we have a significant population in our demographic. You know, maybe they change routine. Maybe it's as simple as they are chewing on their hair again, or they're biting their nails. They change their routine. They can't sleep. So look for those changes in routine. Look for those stomach aches. Look for those headaches that continue on maybe a day or two. Never be afraid to, you know, go for a walk with your kid and just, I have 5 kids. So like sometimes in order to get it out, you have to take one out of the situation. So you'd be like, let's go walk around the block, right? And you go walk around the block and you're like, you know, I've noticed your stomach's been hurting you for 2 days. Is there something more? Are you worried about something? And use terms they'll understand. We are so educated that we think about anxiety, you know, worry. Your kid may just be like, I feel bad about this, you know.
Right.
So be open to that. Noticing those kind of signs that might be there that we wouldn't normally overlook.
Yeah, and I think the same thing goes on the provider side too. If you're working with a child in the classroom that's starting to display those signs again, and you know they're from a military household, or don't know because they may be reserve guard component, something like that, or a veteran household, just asking the question is so important. And just because a child is having those feelings doesn't make you a bad parent, or it doesn't make you a bad teacher if that's happening in your classroom. It's natural for a child to display those feelings. I think like Kelsey talks about, it's important when you start to see those little tiny things to be proactive and take some time to find an intervention, whether it's the therapy or just providing the child with some respite opportunities to back up and calm themselves down and work through those things before they do escalate into something really huge.
Hey folks, this is Hughes. Can everybody see me? I apologize. It took me a long time to figure out the difference between iPhone and computer and everything, so I apologize for that. I think another piece here, and speaking primarily as a guy that deployed quite a bit in combat, is the reintegration of that deployed spouse back into the household as well. Because I can tell you, and I'm sure, especially hearing from you all, because I think sounds like most of you have been the one left behind and dealing with stuff. I would tell you, as a guy coming back into a household, you kind of leave on day one, and so you don't come back until day, 27 months later, which was my case. And you assume that things are normal and things have been operating the way they were operating before you left. And then you come home and you find, hey, your son is shaving now and all these other things. And, oh, by the way, Dad, we don't do things like that anymore. And what that does to the psyche of the person coming back and trying to reintegrate him or herself back into this pod that you've been out of for quite a while. And I think part of the discussion needs to be about how do you bring that person back in, assimilate them as well, make them sensitive to some of the issues that you've been dealing with. And in my case, I would tell you, I've been dealing with PTSD for quite a while, and I'm a senior Army combat commander. And there's another guy by the name of Ham Carter who now heads up AUSA as a 4-star, who also had to confront and deal with the issue of PTSD. And a lot of times we're not aware of it, but you guys see something in us that we don't see in ourselves. And then how you bring that to the forefront. So you may not realize it, but you're pretty screwed up. And spouses can do that. You have that license to do that. We have that license to do that. Because you don't see it, but you're taking out your anger on the kids. You're taking it out on our friends. Your staff officers are scared of you, but they don't know how to approach you. And confronting our own demons and trying to deal with that. And also to feel like we're a part of the family again, that we're productive, that we can help you where we haven't been for quite a while. And I think part of that discussion also needs to involve that person that's being really integrated into the posse, the crew, the squad, the pod, so that they can help the family heal. Because I can tell you, dealing with especially teenagers, when they get that gasoline perfume stage, they and some of you, judging by the smiles, have gone through that. We contribute that to attribute that to hormones, and we kind of say, buck up, buttercup, and tough it out, when it's much deeper than that, and because we're ignorant, and you guys have a tremendous burden and responsibility that you guys have shouldered for quite a while. So that was my 2 bits. Well, I just wanted to share that with you.
Thanks, Hughes. Kara, I'm sure you have a response too.
I do, and I'll be blunt. My husband and I probably aren't the normal couple, but we had a vow to each other, and that was when he reintegrated, we would be honest. No matter what else happened, we would be honest. So with TBI, and not necessarily the mental health TBI or PTSD, but with TBI there is cognitive defect if it is significant enough, and it's very frustrating for any veteran or service member. And I've worked with multiple caregivers of TBI, and we talk about this. It's very frustrating for them when the mind starts to slip. So whether or not you have PTSD in the household, or whether it is a mental cognitive issue, no matter what it is, or even if it's, a returning deployment looking for an adrenaline dump, because we know that happens. Opening the keys, to communication, or opening the lines of communication is key. For us, we had a real quick, we need 5 minutes. It was really quick. You're escalating, or you're frustrated. I'm frustrated. We're not going to get anything done. We take 5 minutes. And it was always 5 minutes. And if it was, look, you're not yourself today. I really feel that you need 5 minutes. And then we'd step aside, we'd come back, and we'd be like, okay, look, you're frustrated. It's coming through in your interactions with the kids today. What can I do to help? What's frustrating you? And especially with, cognitive issues, it can be a structural change too. And we don't talk about that. TBI can cause structural changes that cause irritability, anger, all of that. The biggest thing is keeping that line of communication open, and stepping outside of the wounded. When you're coming back from deployment, it's the same thing. We always, again, we're old school. We didn't have web chats or video when he was deployed. So we would actually film like cassettes, and they would be weekly. It was so silly. It'd be weekly cassettes of our kids would read a book to him. We'd all read together. And then during that, we'd be like, hey, this happened this week. And, this is how life changed. And then we would keep a list of things that changed. And we always kept 1 or 2 things open for Dad. So when Dad came back, he had things he could slide right into that he may have even forgotten while he was gone, but he had things he could slide into. And so it's about taking the concerted effort, for making that happen, but happening on both sides. If you are the deployed member and you come back, and your spouse or your kids, depending on your ages of kids, or if you're a single parent and you have teens and they're like, Dad, you're off your rocks today. It's also about listening. It's about keeping your own mindset open and allowing yourself, one of the things Hannah and I talk about is 5-minute respite breaks, right? 5-minute, 10-minute respite breaks, go out, power through a song, run around the block, whatever you need to do. You take that. If your spouse is saying, hey, I'm seeing some frustration, what can we do to help? Or your teen in a very teen way is like, whatevs, Dad, seriously, right? Give yourself, I'm taking 5 minutes, I'll be right back, and we're going to do this again. I think the more that we as parents can say, I did it wrong, but I'm going to work on fixing it, and admitting that it's okay to mess up in front of your kids, and admitting that you can change, that's powerful. And that is really powerful for a family unit. So as a spouse saying, you know what, you just caught me yelling at Dad because I was frustrated and I shouldn't have done that, and I'm taking my 5 minutes so I can apologize later. Hey, that's where we start building family, as we can be like, hey, we made a mistake. we're fixing it, but we're keeping those lines of communication open too.
That's a great point. And obviously you all are much more enlightened than I am. And I'm old school. As a commander, the only thing that you're worried about is the next deployment and getting your unit ready for that deployment, which, focused on that. And the only question we asked back in my day as a senior commander was, do you have a family support plan, right? And the family support plan is, hey, there's a designee who's going to take care of your kids if we have to deploy tomorrow. And that was the extent of it. It doesn't get into the deep dive discussions and the reality of the situation that you guys are articulating now, which I think is so helpful and so beneficial to be able to share this with other families and say, hey, listen, let us tell you about our story and our previous deployments and our experiences. That makes it so much easier, I think, assuming that the people are receptive to listening to that. So I never thought about that. Well, this is what you can expect, So I mean, this is really helpful.
So,
Well, and
I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that brings us into kind of talking about the mental health of military children, thinking about supporting their mental health and, and what the impact is of their parent service, and then, in this conversation, framing it around, those military children that have wounded, ill, service members that are, so I'll let Hannah go in a little to go into that.
Yeah, I think mental health is huge, and it's something in the community that we just don't understand enough about. I mean, we can see anecdotally, talking to people, looking at our own families, what's happening there in the mental health spectrum, but being able to provide opportunities for improving mental health for military kids, especially those who are serving in that caregiving capacity in a home or are taking on additional burdens because there's a parent out of the house, is huge. We know that 50% of our parents, after their kids return back from camp, say they have seen improved mental health, which is wonderful. However, not everybody can go to camp, or not everybody can participate in programs. There are time barriers, and Kara and I talk a lot about not adding to the burden. We all, especially as families, we all have burden in our household. So how do we find pieces and parts to improve mental health without adding to that burden and it becoming more of a challenge to be able to do that and leading to poorer mental health? There's a fine line there. Kara, do you want to talk a little bit about that piece?
Sure. I mean, and let's just be blunt. There is a large range of mental health. We have everything from anxiety, which is totally, let's use the term normal. It is totally normal to find anxiety in our households. Not a huge population has a parent go to work every day and have to worry about their safety or their life. I mean, let's throw the ugly out there, right? So anxiety leading to depression, dad's gone. I've got to make straight A's at school so that, he's proud of me. All of that adds to what we see. And I see this advocating for veteran caregivers and families, but I remember from our experience too, no one likes to talk about mental health. We're worried it might reflect on our spouse's career. We're worried it might reflect on whatnot. If we have special needs, heck, TRICARE and CHAMPA may not even cover therapy, right? Or it may, we also know that, our kids are a huge part of the next round of service members. So what if we go get them therapy now? Is that going to impact their ability to get a job later? So all of these are concerns we have. And I do want to say on the side note, if you have a special needs or an ASD kid, which is an autism spectrum, both TRICARE and CHAMPA are now covering ABA therapies. Thank you, everyone. Yay. But I mean, let's talk about the wide spectrum. We have that minor, anxiety, mental health. We might even have, we see this sometimes in military kids or, kids who have that parental unit gone for a while, is regression. So you might want to go get someone help with regression because their parent deployed and they started wetting the bed again. You know, they started sucking their thumb again. Is that a bad thing? No, but it means that they're expressing their feelings in the only way they know how. So what does therapy do? It helps them express them in a more positive, more mature way, if you can. And those are kind of those light sides of the mental health range. And then we go all the way through, you know, I need acute care, meaning I've been cutting. They have found out I have a suicide ideation or suicide, you know, thought, all the way into suicidal ideation daily with a plan and attempted suicide. So we have this whole range and we're seeing it. And just like we're trying to be far more open with our service members and our veterans about mental health awareness and PTSD, we need to start talking about it on the family side. You know, and like we can even throw out secondary PTSD too there if we want to talk about that. I'm always a first advocate of therapy. Play therapy if they're young, it is not a bad thing. You know, sometimes we use it, like I said, to help a child walk through a process. They need a safe third-party person to walk through that process, and their therapist can give them that, or a safe place to enunciate a feeling they don't know how else to get across except yelling and screaming and throwing things at you, right? That's what therapy can do. And I don't want anyone here to ever feel like they're a failure because they sought therapy out for their kids or that they didn't meet the right time. They failed because they had to do it. No, you are being an amazing parent by getting your child the support they need in a high stress environment. Even offering them that third party security of a therapist to talk to can sometimes prevent things later down the road.
Yeah, and we can't be everything for our children. I mean, we can't be mom and therapist all at the same time. There's a block in our brain that does not make us good therapists for our own children. So, you know, sometimes we have to play that family therapist role, but being able to get that external support, especially, I mean, even if, you know, we talked a little bit about some of the challenges in the community with seeking external support. Even if it's a small step in that direction, a family friend that your child can talk to, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, somebody outside of that immediate nuclear family that they can talk to and start to express some of those emotions and work towards potentially getting into therapy. And I think, Carrie, you've said it a couple of times before when we've talked, don't be afraid to fire a therapist. If that person is not a good fit for your child or is not making progress, fire them, find somebody else. It's okay.
It's okay. You know, it's interview your therapist, find one you're comfortable with. It's okay to fire them and move on.
Yeah. And we talked about, I mean, so as a parent, you can't be all things to your children. You really can't be all things to anybody. But we said same in structure. So like we've talked before about that the DoD can't be everything for all needs. You know, the DoD has they're very clear on supporting the service member, the mission of what they're doing. And sometimes we need outside agencies, you know, nonprofits, community organizations, you know, our schools, our friends, our partners to come in, especially on the family side, to support those areas where we are finding gaps, so the work that Camp Corral is doing in providing those safe spaces, the work that we do as Kids Rank, in being here weekly to find, have this common ground and this place where kids can connect with other kids and find that support, those are all pieces that are needed, and why this conversation is so important, and, that we are starting to bridge those gaps, so that we don't let them fall through the cracks if they move through the community. Because, I mean, Kara, some of what you were telling me about your journey, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your journey if possible, because I think I don't think people think about it. I just don't think that people even think about it when you think about a military family. People assume that you're all taken care of and that all of the resources that you need are available to you and you're square. So I'd love for you to share a little.
No, that's not how it happens all the time. The people that it happens for, I'm like, amen, hallelujah. So a little bit about us. My husband was in the first runs in Iraq. We were out by 2007. with a husband who was separated honorably for not being able to feel his feet when he ran, but never giving a med board or a med discharge. So he had come to the end of his contract. He kept his commission. He was an officer. A little bit about my husband. He in airborne. He wasn't in airborne, but he got his jump wings. And during one of his jumps in his time of service, his parachute malfunctioned. We have no idea precisely how long he was out when he hit the ground. He doesn't remember. He then deployed twice to Iraq, where he was within 100 yards of a building being blown up by 2 Land Rovers. We like to joke he was 30 seconds late to the party, and that we're thankful for that, because honestly, he would have been in the building had he not stopped because his interpreters were late. And he delayed 45 seconds to pick up to see if his interpreters would show before they drove on. And that's just multiple explosions. He was a combat engineer officer in Bakuba in 2004 and 2003, and later in Iraq, and he went back in 2006 as general engineering officer. So I was young and naive. We had a few kids. We're like, hey, okay, fine. We got separated. We're not going to fight for anything. We'll move on with our lives. It'll be your time in service, and we're going to keep going, right? Little did we know that is not how it would work. It would take us a year and a half to even get him enrolled in the VA to help deal with what they still didn't know, that he had a severe hip injury and a back injury. He had deployed on it and just never really fussed. None of you know how that is, right? Like, your service member doesn't just plow through and keep going. And so we started, going to the VA to try to get some answers. And then if any of y'all remember 2009, we were in an area that was losing 3,000 jobs a day. We both lost our contract employment. By the way, it is not as easy as they told us it would be to find work, after we got out, there was no transition assistance. And by the way, the family readiness groups ended, and all that kind of family support that we were used to was just gone. And it was gone within 4 months of him coming back. He came back in December, and we got out in May. And that was it. DOD washed their hair. They said, okay, you may or may not have a VA rating coming. And we're like, oh, okay. So we ended up getting, I took a job as a nonprofit director in Wisconsin. We moved up to Wisconsin. He was from Wisconsin. My husband was born and bred in the Midwest. I moved in the middle of January, having never lived north of the Mason-Dixon line. We unloaded the moving truck at 32 below zero, and I told them we had made a god-awful mistake. It was so that started our Wisconsin journey. We were there for 9 years. I started working at a nonprofit. We got worked into the VA up there, which is a little bit easier to deal with. It was a 2.5-hour drive one way. We actually had to go into Minnesota because of most of all the specialties. There was no Choice Act or Mission Act back then. It was you went to where you were told. He lost his employment pretty quickly because he had to take so many days off to go into Minnesota. At that time, we had 3 children. Like I said, I was running a nonprofit. We were getting truancy notices because every time, of course, we took the kids with us. Because in case you don't know, if you have to drive 2.5 hours in and you have back-to-back appointments and they might take 10 hours to get through you and drive 2.5 hours home, there is no before and after school care program that will balance your kid for that long, because we had to leave at like 4 a.m. in the morning. So we started homeschooling. And that was, of course, after my husband slipped into a medical coma. Long story. He went in thinking he had the flu. Turned out his lungs filled to 98% capacity with fluid. No one knew why. And he was in a coma for 11, 12 days. What we would find out much, much later down the road is they think he picked up something when he was deployed that, I guess, I don't know, interfered with his lungs somehow. We know a little bit more about like glass lung and things like that now. I think that might be what we're dealing with. Nobody still knows. When he came out of that, and, and had to learn how to re-eat and how to learn how to re-walk. We turned around and they turned around and we started digging into the cognitive deficits, because here's the thing about when you're in private care and you come out, they give you a whole list of things to look for, thinking that he would have a brain injury. And I'm like, oh, well, he's already doing half of this, why? Really? Like, he's already doing half of this. So we started digging into, did he have a brain injury? And we started doing all of that at the same time. They finally diagnosed his hip and back injury. So in 2009, he was medically very, very ill. And by 2010, we were pretty much at the VA daily. I had to give up my work, and we worked part-time jobs to kind of make ends meet, because of course we had a 30% VA rating, and that was it. And so we were trying to make all this work, and they're like, oh, well, don't worry about it. We've got to do back and hip surgery on him anyway. You'll get your Temp 100 and you guys can, take the time to figure it out. He was working.
Can I just pause and say can you explain, in case we have civilians that don't understand what 30%, 100%?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So you get this magical disability rating when you get out of the VA. I'm not going to explain VA math. Please don't ask me. It's on a varying scale depending on who you talk to, from 0 to 100% or permanent in total, which can supplement for 100%. For every disability you have, or for everything that might impede you getting a regular job upon exiting the military, you are giving a percentage. Those percentages add up in a really weird scale. 0 to 30 is what we normally see, I would say, out of a departing service member. 30 to 60 are your service members who are departing but may have a few more issues. When we get to most places, consider 70 to 100% more severe injuries or severely wounded, because those are much harder to get to, because VA math, 10% and 10% do not equal 20%. So we'll just leave it there. So when I say 30%, I mean, we really didn't have a high rating. We had no idea what we were dealing with. Like I said, we knew we had a back and hip injury. And so here we are doing these surgeries and daily VA things. And, now I'm homeschooling the kids, and you show up and they're like, you're too young. You're not allowed to come in. We're not allowed to bring the kids. And I'm like, what do you want me to do with them? I have an infant. Well, you can't bring the stroller. Okay, fine. You tie him on, you bring him in. And I'm taking way too long. So you go through all of this. And long of the story is, we finally fought through everything. We finally got my husband the care he needed. It took us 18 years to get him diagnosed with pretty significant traumatic brain injury, with over 24 hours of unconscious or altered consciousness or unconsciousness from his first injury. And again, I think and during all of that time, you face the financial difficulty of only one of you are working, the other one's a full-time parent. You're baking bread because it's cheaper to do that than buy it at the store. You don't talk about, it takes 6 months to get that Temp 100. They told us, that would kick in. You don't talk about the nonprofits who fill the gap, and literally fill the gap of, putting food in your refrigerator, or, getting everything you need. And in all of this, your kids are just kind of along for the ride, right? And they're living through that uncertainty as well. And then you finally kind of, you get everything rated. We don't talk about the fact that, it's 3 to 4 years for Social Security if you have a veteran doing that as well. And they're kind of along the ride for all of that. And so the mental health impact, and the lasting impact of that on a child, is lasting. You would need to help them figure out a way to express their feelings, because it's the only way you're going to get through it. Or even through a deployment, helping them find a tribe. And I like to say that your tribe is not necessarily going to be their school, especially if you're on a civilian school. You're going to be with 50 other kids who have no idea what it's not, to have to go do your homework in a VA sitting room, or, my kids went to camp and they were like, Mom, there were other dads there in wheelchairs. We went to another retreat and it was like, hey, my kids were like, it was not, do you know his name? And I was like, well, who? And he's like, the guy with the green hat. This guy is a triple amputee sitting in a wheelchair. What does my kid notice the hat? That's what we grow up around, and it's awesome, and I love it. But that's not the normal experience. So helping your kid find their tribe, that is not going to be like, does that guy really need a wheelchair? That's going to be like, oh, hey, your dad's in a wheelchair, big deal. Helping them find someone that can mesh is just so important. And, and if you see signs, if you find a journal with a suicide plan, if you notice scars on your kid, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to go get them out. I know there's a resource list here, and we put a ton of resources on that. Crisis text line. There's actually an app to, like, if your kid feels like cutting, that you can start a timer and they'll help you time down. There's so much out there. Don't be afraid to use it for your kids.
Yeah. So I'm gonna let Hannah take over, but we're in our last about 10 minutes or so, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But also, I just want to make note that Kara's talking about a resource list. We will be sharing. We do have some information and resources around military youth as caregivers and where you might be able to get some help. And so we will be sharing that out after this session is over. But if anybody has any questions at this point, I'm going to actually hand it over to Hannah, and then and we can answer questions as well.
Yeah, we would love to have your questions. We want to be able to provide resources specific to whatever you need. We may not have all the answers, but we'll go back and find them for you.
And so what do you care? Hannah, what are your camp experience? I know it's so transformational for so many of the military youth that go through it. And so, what would you say, kind of your, the magic of your camp, of Camp Corral? Like I know, actually my kids are not, their dad is not injured. We snuck in as one of the few that, were able to participate in our area, but what's the magic of your camp?
Yeah, I think Kara just hit it on the head. Being able to be a part of a tribe that understands. I think whether you're a child whose parent is active duty, reserve, guard, wounded, injured, ill, fallen, there's a small group of people who can relate to you, and being able to be around those who understand, even if you don't talk about it, they get it, they understand. We heard from one parent that their child hadn't brought friends home because they just weren't comfortable having people who didn't get it in their house. And then they met friends who were semi-local to them at camp, and they hang out all the time because they don't ask the questions and they aren't uncomfortable going home and seeing, what's happening in the home. They just understand, and being able to find that group of people, I think for any of us is hugely important, but especially for children and teens, it's life-saving in some cases. It looks like we have a couple of questions coming in.
I was going to say really quickly too, someone mentioned a veterans journey map. I don't have a veterans journey map, but I have a caregiver journey map that I would love to link in if I can do that. That helps explain a lot of the feelings that you may be going through, but also will explain some of the things your family is going through at the same time.
Yeah. I think the more that we can kind of make these overlaps and connections, because it's such a small, niche population, I think we can really make some headway in this area, just because, we can actually connect with people, and really see what's going on.
Right.
Folks, it's hard for me to anger and things of this sort, because I occupied a very high level position in VA, which then coming to Chicago, I ran VA operations here in Illinois until I retired. And this is one of the things, your story is not like other stories that I started to hear as we started to talk with other veterans. Our focus typically are on veterans. We don't think about these other tentacles that start to appear because we just don't think beyond that and capable. And so your story is so important. I'd be more than happy to, this journey map for a care provider would work well. And Kelsey, if I could just suggest that as something capture in a portfolio as we begin that interaction with VA.
Yeah.
In a couple weeks.
Yeah.
On a large scale.
Yeah, I mean, because you think about also, before we got on the call, Hannah and I were talking about that there is a divide between, when you're when you're active duty, and then you become a veteran. And then, because we had this conversation in our first conversation around families, we talked about National Guard families or reserve families. And so how those different, components add to layers of difficulty in sometimes finding resources or access. Kara mentioned that when they became a veteran family, that the family services were ended. And that's typically what happens. And, if you're a National Guard or Reserve family and you're living in a primarily civilian community, you may not be near an installation. And so for the children that are part of that family, they don't understand necessarily, or for the family, like all of those nuances, the service member is still going away, is still doing all the stuff. And for the kids, gone is gone, and, you're still part of this military family, but it's, how you're included or not included can change based on what your status is.
Yeah, and I think, VA is just barely starting to scratch that surface of including the family, that the veteran is not just one person, the veteran includes their whole support unit all the way down to their children. And I think, Kelsey, we've talked about, we have such great opportunities with Camp Corral and Kids Rank working together to be able to shed light on what is happening in our children's lives and be able to be proactive, like you always say, and provide those supports. But there's still so much work left to be done. And I'm grateful that we found our tribe. To be able to work on those things is super exciting, and I can't wait to see where we go in the next couple of years with that. But there's a big understanding gap that needs to be filled, particularly on the VA side, on the civilian side, and even for the individual service member. One of the things we've really been doing in our household in the last couple of years is trying to become a better family and understand each other, open those lines of communications instead of just blowing it off of, oh, you're just a mad teenager right now. But let's talk about why you're a mad teenager right now and get into that and see what we can do to better support each other. I think that's been a really big challenge for us to recognize, hey, we haven't been a great family to each other lately, and we need to work on that.
And that's one of those, keeping those lines. We talked about, keeping lines of communication open, and it's when you can do that as a family, it is powerful. And I'll say too, the VA has made strides. 11 years ago is when they were like, oh, you can't take kids in. And I worked with the staff there, and within 3 years, they had started what used to be called the OIF group there had actually started making, kids toy bags so that they had something to do if they had to come. I'm not saying that we don't have a long way to go about including. We all know that a veteran and service member heal faster when the family's behind them and supported 110%. It doesn't matter whether they're out and at the VA. It doesn't matter whether they're in ICU at Walter Reed and their family sitting in Fisher House. It doesn't matter where how it's happening. But in order to do that, we need to support them on every level. It's the mental health for those families who get that call in the middle of the night, and you end up, living in a Fisher House for a year and a half. It's all of that. So anyway.
No, it's such an important area. And I think, to your point, we're making strides. I think that the awareness is starting to build in conversations such as this and the work that we're doing. Camp Corral, Kids Rank, and other organizations, MSEC, who will be our guest next month for our conversation around education and military children, there are these really cool pillars of programming and support for military kids. And I think that just the more that we have collaboration between us, that the stronger that will be in building this awareness and making sure that there are resources and, research. I mean, it still blows my mind that research is only about 20 years old, as long as there's been a military, around military kids, that is. So we have a couple minutes left. And if one of you, I'm going to ask each of you one piece of advice that you might give to for a veteran, a civilian provider, around this topic, now being in it for, working with the kids and being in a caregiver role. So one piece of advice or something that you'd want to share kind of in wrapping up.
Can I tack on to the resource
Sure.
I think when we build resources, one of the things we really need to keep in mind is those resources also need to be as flexible as our lives. We have a tendency to develop a resource and make it stagnant and not be able to change. And I mention this because in our particular situation, what the TBI ended up doing to my husband is stealing his mobility. He's losing his mobility day by day. It blocked neurons. So most people think you get this injury and you get rated and you walk out the door and it's stagnant, and it's not. It is not always stagnant. Some of them continue to decline, some of them continue to get better. But I think whatever resource we build for the children, whether they be on their first deployment, third deployment, 40th deployment, getting out, we need to make sure those resources can move with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do. Kara, I think that's so important that we have to continue to evolve and adapt what we're doing to be able to meet people where they are and be able to meet the current needs in that moment. It's frustrating to see resources that just kind of stay the same. Like, well, that's not necessarily where we are anymore. Like, can we incorporate TikTok into this or something to get kids going? So being able to adapt, I think, is hugely important, not only for the resources that are out there, but for families, for parents, for providers, looking at the person or the family that's in front of you on that day and working through the challenges of that day, and not so much focusing on the big picture, but what can we do to make this better today? And maybe it'll help long term, but taking it day by day.
Absolutely. Well, I want to be mindful of everybody's time, and I want to thank both Hannah and Kara for joining us, and everybody that was able to join us here in our Zoom room, but also through Facebook Live. I'd like to thank my team that helps us keep our systems running, Meryl, Kayla, and Ashley. And then I'd also like to thank the Pritzker Military Museum and Library for sponsoring this event and this conversation. It's really an important one. And I really believe that in this first year of our Foundations Conversation series, we really want to think about, where are there gaps? How are we connecting with partners? How are we collaborating? And then think about in the years following, how we can partner and how we can really work together to either, go more into research or to develop other programs so that we are, the kids move. So we need this to be something where we're catching them as they move throughout the country. So, and the world really. So thank you so much for joining us today. Next month, we will have the Military Child Education Coalition talking about the impact of education on military families and how our kids navigate through different school systems. So thank you so much for being with us. And I look forward to seeing you next month.